how forces act upon the world. And one stands out, Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. In physics, this law is a stabilizing principle. In geopolitics today, it is a destabilizing factor. We are living in a world where actions, especially reckless ones, are provoking dangerous reactions. And unlike in physics, these reactions are not symmetrical or predictable. They are being multiplied by geopolitical divisions and magnified by an epidemic of impunity. The law of power is prevailing over the power of law. International law is trampled. Cooperation is eroding. And multilateral institutions are under assault on many fronts. When perilous actions do not meet adequate reaction, the system destabilizes. And impunity is driving today's conflicts, fueling escalation, widening mistrust, and kicking the doors open for powerful spoilers to enter from every direction. Meanwhile, the slashing of humanitarian aid is generating its own chain reactions of despair, displacement, and death. At the same time, inequalities are deepening and roiling societies. And climate change is the most literal and devastating illustration of Newton's principle. Every action that hits the planet triggers a ferocious reaction. Storms, wildfires, hurricanes, droughts, rising seas. And then there is technology. We are witnessing perhaps the greatest transfer of power of our times, not from governments to people, but from governments to private technology companies. And when technologies that shape behavior, elections, markets, and even conflicts operate without guardrails, the reaction is not innovation, it is instability. As I look across the spectrum of global challenges, one truth becomes unmistakably clear. Our system of global problem-solving face a reckoning. Those systems are out of time. They still reflect the economic and power structures of 80 years ago. But the world is moving on. Every day, the share of global economic activity by the traditional group of developed economies recedes, quietly, gradually, but undeniably. And every day, emerging economies expand in scale, in influence, and in confidence. Every day, the dynamism of South-South trade further outpaces traditional North-North flows. Yet, our structures, our institutions, our assumptions, our habits of cooperation remain tethered to another time, and these must change. Our structures and institutions must reflect the complexity and the opportunity of these new times and realities. Global problems will not be solved by one power calling the shots, nor will they be solved by two powers carving the world into rival spheres of influence. It is important to accelerate deliberately and with determination multipolarity, one that is networked, inclusive by design, and capable of creating balance through partnerships. Partnerships in trade, in technology, and in international cooperation. But multipolarity by itself does not guarantee stability or peace. Europe, before the First World War, was multipolar. But in the absence of effective multilateral institutions, the result was confrontation and war. For multipolarity to generate equilibrium, prosperity, and peace, we need strong multilateral institutions where legitimacy is rooted in shared responsibilities and shared values. And let's be clear about something else as we strongly pursue reform. Structures may be out of date, but values are not. Leadership today is not a choice about being principled or pragmatic. It is the recognition that principles are pragmatic. The Charter of the United Nations was written by people bloodied and bruised by war. They understood that the values enshrined in our founding documents were not lofty abstractions or idealistic hopes. Those values are sine qua non of lasting peace and enduring justice. Values matter, and people are risking everything to make those values real. That is on full display around the world, whether it is a protester standing up to repression, a journalist standing up to press freedom, or an everyday citizen standing up for their neighbor. Despite all the hurdles, the United Nations is acting to give life to our shared values, and we won't give up. We are pushing for peace, just and sustainable peace rooted in international law, peace that addresses root causes, peace that endures beyond the signing of an agreement. We are pressing to reform and strengthen the Security Council, the only body with a charter-mandated authority to act on peace and security on behalf of every country. But there is no lasting peace without development. And we are acting to accelerate progress on the Sustainable Development Goals and insisting on reform of the global financial architecture. And that includes ending the crushing cycle of debt, tripling the lending capacity of multilateral development banks, and ensuring developing countries just participation and real influence in global financial institutions. On climate, we recognize the overshoot of global temperatures about 1.5 degrees threshold, and that it now requires an overshoot of ambition, starting with deep emissions cuts this decade and a just, orderly, and equitable transition from fossil fuels to renewables. And we are demanding for greater support for countries already confronting climate catastrophe, expanding early warning systems, opportunities for nations rich in critical minerals to climb global value chains. And on technology, we are working urgently to help craft a framework for governance through a global dialogue here at United Nations, the new International Scientific Panel on AI, and enhanced capacity support for developing countries. I will soon submit to the General Assembly a list of 40 names of proposed panel members. And I'm also calling for the creation of a global fund for AI capacity development with a target of $3 billion US. As we begin this year, we are determined to choose actions that generate concrete and positive reactions as called for in the Pact for the Future. Reactions of peace, of justice, of responsibility, and of progress in our troubled times. Thank you, and I'm at your disposal.
Thank you. We'll go to Valeria. Just a note to please limit yourself to one question so we can have as many of you ask questions. But Valeria, please.
Thank you, Steph. Just a quick word before I ask my question. I really want to salute our friend and colleagues, Michelle Nichols from Reuters. And let me say, I don't see you, Michelle, but I know you're here. How much will you miss? Hey, how much will you miss you here? After 14 years, you have been such a constant present, a friend of many of us here at the UN. So the empty spot in the briefing room will be hard to be filled, but we can wait to see all the breaking news that will come next. Thank you, Mish. So thank you, Secretary General, for the press conference. It's Valeria Robecco from ANSA Newswire. My question is, in Italy there has been debate and concern about the involvement of ICE in the security framework of the Milano Cortina Olympics, especially in light of all the controversies and allegations of violence in Minneapolis. You will attend the opening ceremonies, and from a UN perspective, do you believe the Olympics can also serve as a moment to reaffirm global commitment to civil rights and the responsible use of force? Thank you so much.
Olympics are an excellent moment to symbolize peace, to symbolize respect for international law, and to symbolize international cooperation. And I believe that in these circumstances, the sovereignty of Italy must be fully respected.
Thank you. Sorry, I have to go to Michelle second. Sorry, then I'll get you, Edie.
Thank you, Secretary General. I'll take this opportunity to ask two really quick questions. In your speech, you said global problems will not be solved by one power calling the shots. Who is that directed to? And with tensions rising again between the US and Iran, what efforts have you made to try and calm the situation?
In the present moment, it is clear that the most powerful of the countries in the world is the United States. Obviously, we see, and many see, in relation to the future, the idea that there are two poles, one centered in the US and one centered in China. That was the second reference I made. And my point is, if we want a stable world, if we want a world in which peace can be sustained, in which development can be generalized, and in which, in the end, our values will prevail, we need to support multipolarity. We need to support a dense relation, set of relations among different countries. And I see with a lot of positive expectations recent trade agreements. You had EU with Mercosur, you had EU with Indonesia, EU with India, you had Canada with China, you had UK with China. So it is this network in trade, this network in technology, this network in international cooperation among a progressively larger group of countries and entities in a true multipolar world that, in my opinion, can create the conditions for strong multilateral institutions and for a world in which the values that are the values of the Charter of the United Nations can prevail.
And on Iran?
Sorry?
On Iran.
We have condemned vehemently the horrible repression that took place in Iran. We see with concern the discussions that are taking place, and we believe that it's important that there is a dialogue allowing for an agreement in relation, namely, to the nuclear question, and that we can avoid a crisis that could have devastating consequences in the region.
Edie?
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. President Trump's charter for the Board of Peace envisions the board as promoting global peace and makes no mention of Gaza, where the Security Council authorized the board to promote permanent ceasefire and reconstruction. Key global leaders have viewed this vision of the board as an attempt to usurp the Security Council. What is your reaction, and how do you envision the future of dealing with peace and security around the world?
Well, first of all, there is a resolution of the Security Council. That resolution is related to Gaza, in that resolution there is a number of attributions that are given to the Board of Peace and to other institutions. It is absolutely essential that this resolution is implemented, which means we have in Gaza a ceasefire that a very distinguished journalist has classified recently as a lesser fire, which means it's a ceasefire, but the fire goes on. We must have a ceasefire in Gaza. And we must move with the second stage fully, which means full withdrawal of Israeli forces, decommissioning of armed groups, and also to pave the way to the two-state solution to finally become a reality. This is something that is supported by the Security Council. This is something in which we are deeply engaged, namely in humanitarian aid in Gaza.
Thank you. Bisan? Oh, sorry.
No, on the issue of the Charter of the Board of Peace trying to usurp the Security Council.
We are talking about the Security Council, and the Security Council only talks about Gaza. Everything else is something that is different, and obviously, in my opinion, the basic responsibility for international peace and security lies with the UN, lies with the Security Council, that, as you know, the Security Council stands alone in its charter-mandated authority to act on behalf of all members in questions of peace and security. Only the Security Council can adopt decisions binding on all, and no other body or ad hoc coalition can legally require all member states to comply with decisions on peace and security. Only the Security Council can authorize the use of force under international law and set out in the Charter. So the centrality of the peace and security system lies in the UN, and within the UN in the Security Council, and that is the reason why it is so important to reform the Security Council. And it's very interesting to see that some that criticize the UN for being not effective are the ones opposing the reform of the Security Council. That is the reason why the UN can sometimes not be as effective as we all want.
Bisan, then Sherwin.
Thank you, Secretary General. Bisan Abukwik with Al Jazeera Arabic. I wanted to follow up on the Palestine issue, but when it comes to the West Bank and settlements. And I mean, you speak about the role of the UN, but the UN, UNRWA, is being attacked in East Jerusalem by Israel. We are seeing settlement activity expanding and settler violence. You're talking about moving to the second phase of the agreement and then to a two-state solution, which now on the ground in the West Bank seems further and further away from being a reality. If you can, how optimistic, are you still optimistic that there is still a two-state solution in the horizon?
I always respond to that question with the same answer, which is a sentence of Jean Monnet that I'm not optimistic, I'm not pessimistic, I'm determined. And I'm determined to oppose, and to oppose in a very strong way, all the efforts that Israel is doing to undermine the two-state solution, namely through, in the West Bank, the construction of settlements, demolitions, evictions, and the violence of the settlers. And we believe that this must stop, and we believe that conditions must be created to make sure that Gaza, that will have now its new governance model, that governance model progressively is linked to the Palestinian Authority, and that Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, will be the future state of Palestine.
Can I just get one follow-up? How is it going to be implemented? Who is going to actually put pressure on Israel to actually implement that?
Everybody must make pressure. Let's recognize the reality. I mean, the country that has more power to put pressure on Israel is the United States. And that is why it was important that the United States have recognized the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination.
Sherwin, then Dennis.
South African Broadcasting. Given the large role that UN officials, including yourself, played during South Africa's G20 presidency, which ended with the Leaders' Summit last November, you will have seen South Africa's exclusion from G20 processes under the United States leadership that has accused South Africa of leading an exercise in spite, division, and racial agendas that have nothing to do with economic growth. South Africa, which became the first African country to chair the forum last year, has since decided to step back from the year because of the US posture. Given your first-hand experience of the G20 under South Africa last year, what do you make of this development? You said in your statement, and to quote a colleague of mine, that global problems would not be solved by one power calling the shots. Is this an example of that?
Well, it's an example of many other things. I must say that the G20 is not a multilateral organization in the sense that the G20 has specific responsibilities essentially for the aspects of the economic and financial issues and trade. And it is not like the United Nations or like the World Bank or like a multilateral institution. So the G20 is an aggregation of countries. I must say that I was present in the G20 session in South Africa, and that I was fully supportive of the agenda introduced by the South African presidency. And I consider that South Africa played a very positive role in the way it presided the G20. And it doesn't make any sense for me that South Africa is not permanently a full member of the G20 in all circumstances.
Dennis, and then Pam.
Thank you, Secretary General, for your briefing.
So where are you?
As it was said before, in case of Greenland, the United Nations, along with principle of territorial integrity, believes in right of self-determination of nations. Does the UN believe that the right of self-determination applicable to Crimea and Donbass?
We have had very interesting discussions on this, and there are two principles that are essential. One principle is territorial integrity of states. The other principle is self-determination of peoples. But self-determination of peoples has a number of requisites. So the way it is defined has a number of requisites. And after a very careful study by our Office of Legal Affairs, it is our position that the principle of self-determination does not apply in the situations of Crimea and Donbass. So in that situation, the principle that prevails is the principle of the territorial integrity of Ukraine.
Pam, then Talal.
Thank you for the briefing, Secretary General. How do you see the UN's role, given what you've said about current military conflicts, particularly unilateral moves by several members of the UN Security Council in the current situation, in the current configuration? Can the UN get back to multilateralism when so many of the conflicts are unilateral? Thank you. Or created and problem solved by some of the members of the Security Council. Thank you. Pamela Fox, U.S. News and World Report.
It is obvious that the fact that members of the Security Council are themselves violators of international law doesn't make life easy for the UN in its efforts. But that doesn't mean that the Secretariat of the UN does not get involved as much as possible, and I myself do not get involved as much as possible in trying to create the conditions for peace to prevail in the dramatic situations we face. Unfortunately, there is one thing that we miss. It's leverage. It's the power that others eventually have, to force countries and to force leaders to abide by international law. But not having the power, we have the determination, and we will do everything possible with our persuasion, with our good offices and building alliances to try to create the conditions for some of these horrible tragedies we are witnessing. And from Ukraine to Sudan, not to mention what has happened in Gaza, we will be doing everything we can for these tragedies to stop.
Thank you. Thank you. Talal, then Volodymyr.
I would like to have the power to make them stop.
Thank you, Steph. The UN80 initiative, which was approved by the General Assembly at the end of December, how confident are you that this initiative will ensure the continuity of the UN system to be effective, albeit more nimble and cost-effective, and et cetera, and the continuity of this organization?
Well, I'll just give you an example with our last regular budget. We have reduced 22% of the posts in the regular budget, which means in the Secretariat, not counting now with peacekeeping operations. And we have done it in a way that was prepared in advance. We have been working to make it possible for more than 1 year, namely creating vacancies in the structure in order to make sure that we were able to reduce 22% of the posts without creating a dramatic social impact, because we had previously made many of those posts vacant and create vacancies in others to which people can compete. And we are able to do this kind of reform in a, I would say, completely well-organized methodology with the participation of all the UN system and without creating any disruption, any turmoil, as we have seen sometimes in other reforms in other parts of the world, which means that the UN is able to do things efficiently. And knowing public administrations as I know, because I was at a certain moment head of one, I have to tell you that there is a lot to improve in the UN. There are many things in which we can do better, but I'm very proud of the work of the UN, and I think the UN is more efficient than many of the public administrations that criticize us.
Volodymyr, then Mariam.
Mr. Secretary General, my name is Volodymyr Ichenko, National News Agency of Ukraine, Ukrinform. We see that Putin's Russia is deliberately bombing energy infrastructure in Ukraine in order to freeze the Ukrainian population and trigger a humanitarian catastrophe. As the leader of the largest and most respected international organization, what would you advise Ukrainians to do under these circumstances? Thank you.
We have been in consultations with Turkey and with other, we have been advocating for the possibility of an agreement. In the past, we, together with Turkey, were able to materialize and to broker the only real agreement that was possible to establish in the Ukraine crisis or the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, with the exception of exchange of prisoners, with the so-called Black Sea Initiative and Azovstal. And we believe that a similar agreement should be established. Now, in order to avoid any kind of bombing, I mean, a kind of a limited ceasefire to the bombing of energy infrastructure and the bombing of harbors, as a limited contribution, but an important contribution to avoid the horrible tragedy that, especially with these bombardments, the people are suffering.
Mariam, and then Ibtisam.
Secretary General here. Mariam Ramati with Iran International and Afghanistan International. One question that I have is on Afghanistan. As you know, Rosemary DiCarlo traveled to Afghanistan, talked to the Taliban about Doha process. Do you still believe in Doha process and the pragmatic talks that you've been saying to have with the Taliban? The girls haven't been able to go to school for almost 4 years. Even your employees at UNAMA have been banned from working at the offices or deliver aid to people. Where is your red line to stop these talks with the Taliban when it has no results and it's not changing anything on the ground? And also a follow-up on Iran. Tens of thousands of people have died and so many have been arrested. Did you pick up the phone to talk with the Islamic Republic officials to talk about the protesters who have been arrested and some might be even hanged? And is condemnation, is that enough for that? Thank you.
The answer for the second question, if I talked with the, yes. The answer for the first question. This is a dilemma that we face every day. Should we go on engaging in some specific areas? Some of them with some positive impact, namely in relation to the private sector, it has been possible to have women working in several areas of Afghanistan. But at the same time, we are deeply frustrated by the fact that we remain without our staff, our female staff, not being able to go to our headquarters. They are able to work in the field, but not in our headquarters, what is unacceptable. And the fact that we still do not have access of girls to, I would say, standard secondary education and above. So this is indeed a dilemma. We have until now thought that it was worse to go on with the engagement, but we share your frustration, and this is a question that we ask ourselves every day.
Ibtisam, and then we'll go to China TV. Ibtisam.
Thank you. Here, second line. Thank you. My name is Ibtisam Azim, Al Arab Al Jadid newspaper. I have first a quick follow-up on the Board of Peace. Some experts will say that the Board of Peace and the whole mechanism that was created in Gaza is to sideline the UN and its work. What's your opinion? And for example, the Security Council resolution that you referred to, even the report that is supposed to be submitted is submitted by the Board of Peace itself and not by the UN. And my question is about accountability and UNRWA. More than 300 UNRWA Palestinian workers were killed. Israel banned the work of UNRWA. Etc. So my question is, which steps would you want to take for accountability? Thank you.
Well, you have asked many questions at the same time. So let's see one by one. First of all, we are working in Gaza, and we are working in Gaza. And I have to say that since this lesser fire is working, the truth is that there was an exponential increase of humanitarian aid. There was for a long period a discussion in which Israel would say that there was no humanitarian aid in Gaza because the UN was inefficient, and you were saying that there was no humanitarian aid because of the obstacles that were created by Israel. And the truth is that when the ceasefire, the first ceasefire took place, and now the humanitarian aid exploded. It's not enough. A lot more needs to be done, because it's not only food that matters, it's everything related to health, it's everything related to shelter, it's everything related to so many things that are still missing. But the truth is that there was very important increase in humanitarian aid, and we are totally committed to do more and to overcome all the obstacles. So we are in Gaza entirely involved. On what Israel is doing to UNRWA premises, we have been taking very clear positions of condemnation, and we have acted in relation to that based on the positions that were assumed by International Court of Justice. On the other hand, we will not stop doing everything we can to guarantee that UNRWA will be able, with all the difficulties and all the obstacles, to provide the vital support that UNRWA provides to the people. And we claim for the need of accountability in relation to the 380 UNRWA members that were killed.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Mr. Secretary General, this is Tao Xu with China Center Television. So you said today that the global system are outdated and the multilateralism should be more inclusive. China, as the largest developing country, has been more active in development, climate, and the South cooperation. So how do you see China's role in global governance going forward? Thank you.
I think that we need to move into a multipolar world, and we need simultaneously to have multilateral institutions. And I have to say that China has been consistently advocating for the need of multilateralism, and with UN at its center. And this was recently reaffirmed by President Xi Jinping.
Ahmed Fethi, then Yvonne.
Thank you. This is Ahmed Fathi, ATN News. Mr. Secretary General, you warned that tech companies now shape elections and conflicts if their power rivals or exceed that of states. Does the UN truly have leverage, or are governments no longer in control?
We do not have leverage, but we are creating instruments to minimize our difficulties in the international community to put in place strategies to avoid the worst. Things will be different when we have our high-level scientific panel. I'm hoping to present the 40 names for the General Assembly in the next few days, maximum few weeks, but it's practically done. We had 2,400 candidates, which demonstrates the interest of the international community in this panel. And this panel will make reports every 6 months or every year about the state of the art of artificial intelligence in its different components. And it will be able to do reports on specific asks of member states. And this is for member states from all over the world. I mean, it's a global institution. And this is something that I believe is essential, to have an independent scientific entity that explains what's really happening in the world of artificial intelligence and explains to what extent what is happening from a scientific point of view undermines a certain number of essential values, namely the way democratic institutions must work. I think we do what we can do with our contribution. We have not the power to do a global regulation of artificial intelligence, and that would not have been possible. But we will be doing what we can, creating this mechanism, and then an annual dialogue with all countries of the world and with the key stakeholders to take note of what scientists say and to be able to, at least, I hope, establish or agree on a certain number of guardrails to preserve human agency that I believe is essential.
Yvonne, then Arul.
Thank you, Secretary General. Yvonne Moriarty, News. Thank you very much. My question is, in your remarks, you referred to the possibility of the superpowers, the United States and China, carving up the globe into two spheres of influence. How likely is that scenario in your view? And what would your advice be to smaller countries like Ireland in this era of might makes right, countries like Ireland that don't have any might?
As I said, that is a possibility that I hope will not materialize. The best way to do it is exactly with the examples I just made. It's through a network of connections, of which China and the United States are part, but in which all the different countries and regions of the world establish, in a context of multipolarity, trade agreements, technology agreements, other forms of international cooperation, and create with that the fabrics of an international community where no supremacy can, in any case, be successful. And that is also the condition to allow for multilateral institutions to be able to work effectively.
Thank you. Arul, and then Aziz, Moroccan Press Service.
Arul Lewis from Indo-Asian News Service.
Sorry,
If you could raise your hand.
Yeah. Last year, when you addressed us, you laid out 4 priorities. In retrospect, how do you think it has worked out? And if I can sneak in a subtle question, what do you think would be your legacy?
This is a problem that I do not put myself. I've been Prime Minister of Portugal, never cared about what people say about my legacy. I was High Commissioner for Refugees. I never cared about what people think about my legacy. And I will be ex-Secretary General of the United Nations. I will not lose my time thinking about what people think about my legacy. I'm doing my duty, and I'll do my duty in the best possible way, and this is what is my role. The legacies are usually the appreciation of others. I leave it humbly to what others might understand.
Thank you. Aziz, Moroccan Press Service, then Chris.
Thank you, Secretary General. Aziz Rami for the Moroccan Press Agency, MAP. You have called several times, including today, for the reform and strengthening of the Security Council. There have been many ideas put forward about continents or regions that are not represented in the Security Council. Do you think now that reforming the Security Council is still possible? And what would an ideal Security Council look like, in your opinion? Thank you.
Well, it's not for the Secretary General to define what the Security Council will be. So the opinion I'm going to give you is a personal opinion. It's not a formal position of the Secretary General. But I do believe that we should have permanent members from Africa in the Security Council, the same representation of Latin America. I think that probably Asia is underrepresented also clearly. And so this rebalancing needs to be done. And I see with a lot of sympathy some initiatives that were presented, namely by 2 permanent members of the Security Council, in order to put some limits to the exercise of the right of veto, namely in circumstances of genocide or terrible crimes against humanity. So these would be the lines of evolution I would like to see the international community come together in order to have a reformed Security Council.
Chris, Nada, then Namo. Raise your hand, please, Chris. Yeah.
Thank you for this briefing, Secretary General. Chris Reyes with Canadian Broadcasting. I'd like to ask you about recent remarks from Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. First in Davos, where he described a rupture in the world order. In other comments, he talked about the breakdown of multilateral institutions that he said would lead to overlapping and dynamic alliances and likely bypass those institutions. I wonder what you think of that kind of characterization, particularly the latter part, whether you think it's accurate. And given that this is your final year, I wonder if you could reflect on what kind of qualities the next Secretary General should have to deal with these existential concerns.
What kind of powers?
Qualities.
Qualities. First, I think that the Prime Minister of Canada has presented a number of risks that we are facing in the international community. I mentioned in my intervention many similar risks, but I don't think that our key institutions have been completely, I would say, destroyed or over. The UN is still there. It's still in the center of the international multilateral system. It is reforming itself. It must reform itself. But with all the things that are happening, I am still very proud of the work that the UN is doing. What are the qualities that I wish that the next Secretary General has? I think if you could be a saint and a hero, it would be wonderful.
Thank you. Nada?
Because, as was noted, their values now rival the GDP of some countries. You talked about guardrails, but can you be a bit more specific about what those guardrails should be? And what about the size of these companies? Do you think anything should be done by governments to also take a look at that?
A central principle for me is the principle of human agency. And I think it's absolutely essential to guarantee that there is no loss of control by humans about what happens. And this, of course, has consequences in the different ways in which we look into the different areas of artificial intelligence and its uses, including in weapons, for instance. I would be strongly against autonomous weapons that can decide who to kill, where to kill, and for what reason. As I said, the question of human agency is for me the central question in the guardrails that you have mentioned. Your second question, sorry?
About the size of these companies.
There are in many countries legislation in relation to monopolies, and I think that those legislations should be adapted to take into account the realities of new technologies.
Can I just follow up? The U.S. tech companies, do you think they fit monopolies and the U.S. government, politicians?
What I think that is happening is a massive transfer of power from government institutions to companies. Because power today relates essentially to data. And what we are witnessing is a massive transfer of the, not only of data, but of the capacity to manage data to private institutions.
Namo, if I could remind you to stick to one question, please.
For this briefing. This is Namo Abdullah with Rudao Media Network. I have one question. In recent weeks, we've seen Syrian government forces wage an offensive to retake areas from Syrian Kurds, the Syrian Democratic Forces. Those areas were taken from ISIS by Syrian Democratic Forces. And the Syrian Kurds say they want to keep their arms to protect their territory because they're skeptical of the new forces in Damascus. My question is, shouldn't the international community understand the Kurdish position, given their history of persecution at the hand of the Islamic State, the Yazidi genocide, and grant them a degree of autonomy so that they can run their own security and domestic affairs within a united Syria? Thank you.
Well, I know something about the history of the Syrian Kurds. In the time of President Assad, we had several, as High Commissioner for Refugees, responsible for statelessness, several serious discussions on the fact that Syrian Kurds were, for the majority, stateless, not recognized as citizens in Syria. And so there is an history of persecution to Syrian Kurds that is real and that I recognize. Now, at the present moment, I think we need to, first of all, recognize that this problem was solved. The government has now issued a decree that confers nationality to all Syrian Kurds. This is solved. I think that the solution of the problem will not be military. I think the solution of the problem is to create institutions in which all communities feel represented. And we will do everything we can to advocate in this regard.
Gabriel, then Kari.
Hello, Mr. Secretary General. Gabriel Elizondo from Al Jazeera English. We've spoken about many topics here over the last hour or so, but one that has not come up is Sudan. You've spoken out about Sudan many times over the last months and really years. Nothing has changed in the conflict that is now, as you know, the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world. What do you envision specifically your role and the UN's role in the next year to finally change the trajectory of this conflict and bring about peace once and for all?
We are very active now, myself inclusive, but Lamam are very engaged in a series of contacts. Our objective at the present moment is to create the conditions for at least a temporary ceasefire and for the possible demilitarization of some zones in order to allow for humanitarian aid to be not limited. So it's of course not the solution of the problem, but it is a minimization of the dramatic, horrible impact in the Sudanese people. And I have to say that I worked in Sudan as High Commissioner for Refugees, and I've seen the Sudanese people extremely generous, hosting refugees from different neighbors and sharing with them sometimes what they did not have. So the suffering of the Sudanese people is something that, I feel very strongly in my heart. But let's be honest, the question is that Sudan became a kind of a playground where a number of international actors are spoiling things in such a way that makes it very difficult for the Sudanese themselves to come together. And one thing that we will be doing as much as we can is to limit the capacity of externals to interfere in the Sudanese situation, namely providing weapons and doing other forms of, I would say, aggravating what is already an immense tragedy.
Kari, then Frank.
Thank you, Secretary General. Kari Naughton for Radio France Internationale and Le Monde. You've just a quick follow-up.
En français ou en anglais?
No, it's okay. We can do it in English. Don't worry. Well, you know, even our president now speaks English in Davos. So you've just said it's just a quick follow-up about your successor. You've just said that you don't have the power to stop these atrocities. So in your personal opinion, not as your Secretary General opinion, but can you say how could this successor have more power?
I think it would depend on the Security Council being reformed, the Security Council being able to act, and being able to act with the power that the Security Council has, create the conditions for the good offices of a Secretary General to be much more effective.
Frank, and then Carmela.
Secretary General Frank Uciardo from TRT World. Thank you for doing this press conference. We really appreciate it. Great to see you here. I want to get your reaction to reports that Iran is going to conduct some live fire drills in the Gulf beginning on February 1st, and also your reaction to Donald Trump saying that time is running out for Iran as far as getting a nuclear deal, intimating that he's going to perhaps attack.
I think it's absolutely essential that dialogue prevails. I strongly encourage dialogue to take profit of the offers of mediation that have been expressed. We do not want to see, and I believe the Iranians tell us that they also do not want to have nuclear weapons. So if that is the case, all the conditions are there for a serious negotiation to take place, and I encourage the parties to seriously negotiate in order to avoid a confrontation that would be a tragedy.
Carmela.
Camelia Intikhabi Fard, Chief Editor of the Independent Persian on Iran. Secretary General, on date, as of today, there is not an information of an official statement by Secretary General or any other public places at the United Nations indicating that directly you have asked Iran to accept a formal mission of the fact-finding mission to visit Iran, to investigate on the protest killings in 2 days, which reported over than 30,000 people has been killed. Do you have any plan directly asking Iran to accept this request, or there is any plan for? Thank you.
Well, that is in the competence of the Human Rights Council, and the Human Rights Council has established committees of inquiry in many situations or similar things. And of course, if the Human Rights Council decides so, it will have full support of the Secretariat.
Pan, and then Marta. Go ahead.
Thank you, Secretary General.
Yeah, just
This is
don't touch it. It'll turn on. There we go.
Okay.
You're good.
Yeah. Thank you, Secretary General. This is Yun Zhaopan from China's Xinhua News Agency. I have a very general question. Last year, this time, you laid out 4 priorities for 2025. One is conflict and inequality, climate crisis, and AI, maybe. So in terms of conflict, US President Trump claimed he ended 8 wars. So can you give us an evaluation of the progress made over the past year by the United Nations in preventing conflict? And are you concerned about the future role of the United Nations in security and peace and security? Thank you.
Not at all. The United Nations is very active in several scenarios. There are areas where we are not mediators because at least one of the parties does not want us to mediate. It was the case of Russia-Ukraine. Russia never wanted us to be mediator of the conflict. It was the case of Israel with the Palestinians. Israel never accepted the UN to be a mediator, probably because we would mediate based on our values, the values of the Charter. And if those that violate the Charter probably are not interested in the mediation by an entity that is in itself the entity that represents the Charter. But we are extremely active as we speak, from Libya to Sudan to South Sudan. Yesterday we were in contact with the different entities in South Sudan, and I have a number of contacts programmed now to try to avoid the worst in the situation of South Sudan, in the DRC, in Myanmar, very active now in the negotiations related to Western Sahara, quite active in the area of the Sahel and in the contacts between ECOWAS and the countries of the Sahel. And I could go on and on and on with a number of situations in which we are extremely active with efforts of mediation, efforts of conciliation of positions, peace processes. There is only one thing we do not have, is the instruments of power to force parties to come to an agreement.
Thank you, Sinan. And then, sorry, Marta and then Sinan, sorry.
Hello, Marta Moreira from Lusa, the Portuguese National News Agency. I don't know if we can speak in Portuguese. I'm allowed? Inicial disse que, ou enalteceu os manifestantes que se têm levantado ao redor do mundo contra a repressão. E amanhã temos aqui nos Estados Unidos vários protestos marcados contra a repressão à imigração. 2 cidadãos norte-americanos já morreram em Minneapolis. Qual é a sua visão sobre esta situação? Teme que a repressão esteja a crescer aqui nos Estados Unidos? E se permite, deixe-me lhe perguntar também se considera uma falha da ONU se a próxima pessoa eleita para o substituir não for uma mulher.
Bem, em primeiro lugar, nós consideramos que o direito de manifestação é um direito essencial e aqui, como em qualquer outra parte do mundo, é essencial que as forças de polícia e outras usem a contenção indispensável para evitar que os manifestantes paguem com as próprias vidas o preço da sua atividade. De qualquer das formas, espero que, no quadro de uma sociedade democrática, as investigações que foram anunciadas possam levar a conclusões que são muito importantes nesse domínio. A segunda pergunta era...
Se o seu sucessor não for uma mulher.
Eu devo dizer-lhe uma coisa. Eu penso que é claramente tempo para as Nações Unidas, como para as principais potências do mundo, ter uma mulher à sua frente. Não tenho dúvidas nenhumas a esse respeito. Agora, não me compete a mim fazer a escolha, fazer a decisão, não sou eu que voto. Portanto, digamos, a minha opinião é irrelevante. Mas se olharmos as posições de maior responsabilidade a nível mundial, seja nas Nações Unidas, falando de secretário-geral, porque ao nível dos altos quadros das Nações Unidas temos paridade, e tenho muito orgulho nisso, mas a verdade é que, quer nas Nações Unidas, quer nas posições de liderança dos países mais poderosos do mundo, é tempo de vermos mulheres.
Sinan, then Iftikhar, then I'm sorry, we'll have to close it.
My name is Sinan from the Amargi. I have a question about Kurdish rights. You haven't made a single statement regarding the right of self-determination, specifically under Article 1 of the UN Charter and Article 3 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People for the 40 million Kurds. So the question is, why haven't you issued a statement on this matter? Are you perhaps fearful of state pressure and reactions from the countries where the Kurds live? Okay.
Now, I must say that at the present moment, my main objective is, and we are also with our mission in Syria dealing with that, my main objective is to create the conditions for Syria to be able to have a society in which all of its components feel that their rights are respected and at the same time feel that they belong to the country as a whole. This has been our priority at the present moment.
Thank you.
Very general question for Kurds, not only in Syria. I meant Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria. That was my question.
But I mean, in relation to Iraq, there are democratic institutions in which the Kurds are represented, as you know. In relation to Iran, the situation is different. But obviously, I think the Kurdish people has been the victim of history. But to a certain extent also of the difficulties to come together and to create the conditions for its affirmation. But we are very much committed to the defense of the interests of the Kurdish peoples, wherever they are.
Thank you. Last question, Iftikhar will go online.
Thank you, Steph. Mr. Secretary General, wishing you greater successes in the new year My question has been asked by my colleague Mariam, but I have more to ask on this subject. Sir, the visit of USG DiCarlo took place when there is an open split between the Taliban in Kabul and the Taliban and the leadership in Kandahar. And in this situation, what was her assessment? I mean, does she hope things are going to get better? And secondly, sir, the United Nations Security Council reports confirm that Afghan Taliban provide full support to TTP, the terrorist group which continues to carry out deadly attacks in Pakistan, despite the pledge given by the Taliban to the international community that they will not allow their soil to be used for cross-border attacks. Any thoughts on this, sir?
We remain totally committed to 4 essential objectives in Afghanistan. First, to make sure that the Afghan institutions are really inclusive and that all ethnic groups are represented and all sectors of society are represented. We consider that a basic condition for the consolidation of peace. Second point, we believe it's absolutely essential to respect human rights, but essentially the rights of women and girls. Rosemary DiCarlo managed to guarantee the possibility of our staff women to work in the field, but not in our headquarters. And we are very frustrated with that, and we believe that there is this is one of the areas where the failure of the Taliban to deliver in relation to the, I believe, the international community in a very justified way wants is unacceptable. Then another aspect, which is the need to make sure that no terrorist organizations can operate from Afghanistan into other countries. And we are particularly concerned with what happened with the Pakistani Taliban and the support they might receive. And finally, the need to control drug trafficking. And there, we have to say, we have to recognize that there was meaningful progress since the Taliban emerged. But in relation to the 3 other aspects, we have a frustration that because we don't see our legitimate concerns making the progress that is essential.
Thank you very much. Thank you.